what do you do now? Are you going to have to use a different medium in terms of inputting your data? How does SurveyMonkey deal with that? And it's actually a very robust platform. You can actually add your data manually. And that's really what's important, is for you to understand your population, and you say, okay, maybe I can get 60% on the internet, but the other 40%, we're going to have to get research assistants to go to their homes and collect that data. Then you can input it into the SurveyMonkey file, and when you're done, then you'll download it into the software that you're going to do your data manipulation in. So there's many ways that you're going to want to capture your target audience, your population. I'm going to show you what happens when you start using social media. I'll never forget the day that we moved to the Western Province and started to get responses from Jeddah. And ladies from Jeddah are different than ladies in other parts of the kingdom. And suddenly, some ladies started tweeting about the survey. And overnight, it exploded. I mean, just boom, hundreds of people in Jeddah, ladies, were doing the survey. And we really didn't know what was going on and where did they get the information from, and how are we going to consider this, and what does that mean to self-selection and sample bias, et cetera. So one of the things that I've done now is I want to track social media. Where did you get information from the survey? So when we talk about ways of reaching out to our population, you can post it on social media, on your Facebook page, and send it on Instagram. You can send out emails with web links. If it's an institutional study, you may have a list of all students. You may have a list of all faculty and staff. That might be the universe of your population. Keep in mind, when we're talking about assessing selection bias, there's two issues that are involved. One is the response rate, and I mentioned to you that for mass marketing of commercial campaigns, 1% is pretty good, 2% is fantastic. 2% for us is a disaster. So we have to keep in mind, what is the expected response rate of our target population? So let's suppose you had how many students? 20,000? Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's say your population universe is 20,000. You sent out an email to all 20,000. Doesn't mean they all got it, right? That's just your universe of your population. You're going to look at the response rate. Who knows how many are still using or even logging on to their university email account, right? We don't know. But let's suppose out of 20,000, you got 2,000 that responded. So you've got a response rate of 2,000 out of 20,000. So that's people that may have logged on to SurveyMonkey and they've signed off electronically and said they give their consent to do the survey, right? So that's 10% out of 20,000. We don't know who the other 18,000 people are. That's a different question. But the completion rate is going to tell us how well the survey is going. And I'll get your question in a minute. So our completion rate is out of that 2,000. And let's suppose out of that 2,000, 1,000 people completed the survey. 2,000 started, we know that. 1,000 finished. So we have a completion rate of 50% of 10%. So keep that in mind as you're trying to understand the potential biases in your data collection. Yeah?
Yeah, for example, if I have a survey in the university, and there's a response from different faculties, I want to compare between the different faculties. How can I do that using survey? Using SurveyMonkey survey. Because I may receive the response from one faculty, and the other they didn't respond.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that's a lot easier because, as I'll show you in terms of reweighting your data, My focus is on 19 to 29-year-old Saudis who have attended college. I know the population parameter of that group. I can go to the Ministry of Education and I see what percentage of Saudis go to higher education. And within that, I know how many women are a proportion of the attendees of higher education at Saudi institutions, and I can reweight it. 53% are women, in total 47% are men. If I'm looking at some kind of representative reflection of what's going on, that's how I would reweight my data. In your case, you should have institutional information of faculty by education, PhDs, non-PhDs, departments, etc. And you can see then from the response rate of the known characteristics of your population parameters, who's responded, who hasn't, which groups have responded more than the other groups, and then you take that information and you can reweight it to the known population parameters of your group. That's how you could do it in a context that you have known information. That's why census data is so important to us. If we look at the census and it's done well, we can compare our data to the census data, assuming, it's a big assumption, right? Assuming the census data is a true reflection of the population parameters of that population, of that sampling universe. So if you have poor institutional information, you got some problems because you don't know what you're comparing to. If you have a good census, you know who should have reported or participated and at what level they should have participated, and you take your sample and you weight it in terms of those proportions. If you don't have a good census, now you got a problem, because all the other studies that are going to be conducted based on assuming the national census is a true and accurate estimate of the population parameters, now everybody's guessing. That's why we put so much work into a good U.S. census for national planning purposes and for academic purposes. So institutional research is going to be based on is going to depend on the baseline you have of the accuracy of information that you should have, because human resources should have all this information. If it's not, then you got the dilemma.
Yeah, yes, I have a good information about the population segments, but the response rate may differ according to the faculty, according to the student, according to the level of the student, whether they are master or BSc. The response rate is different from one faculty to another. If I would like to make comparison between faculties, how can I manage this? This is my question.
Well, if you can't improve the response rate, you look at the baseline proportions of your institutional data. So if you know that 20% of your population is faculty in the medical sciences, and you only have 10% of your sample is from medical sciences, you're going to reweight it to 20%, and you're going to look at those faculty that have responded, and you're going to have to estimate those who didn't. I mean, that's a lot easier than it is when you're doing a national survey and you don't know what percentages really exist. So in that case, you have to figure out what are your incentives to improve your response rate, and then how accurate is the information you have. So how often is HR information updated? So when people leave KFU, are those records deleted from your institutional file, or does it take a year for those adjustments to occur? I mean, that's the baseline that you have to work with and you have to find out about when you make those comparisons. So these are just general issues of, online. The key is, can you add manually collected data? Very important. Mobile apps now, you've got to make sure that your survey is accessible on mobile devices versus desktops. I mean, that's how the technology constantly is changing. As I mentioned, there's actually people whose jobs are being professional survey respondents. You just sign up your profile, your age, your gender, your education, your political orientation, your consumption preferences, married, children. I mean, you put in all that information, and literally there's somebody somewhere in the world that'll pay you to answer their questionnaire. So there are ways, as I said, the key of doing good research is to optimize the resources you have. In the example of, they said it would cost $3 million to do my survey, well, I could have hired a lot of people to be a lot more rigorous. If you're only going to get 600 or 700, you better be really, really rigorous. If you can get 4,000, which is rare, and I'm happy and privileged about that, I can afford to have less rigor because the data will cancel each other out with that sample size. So those are the advantages and disadvantages of being able to get a large population size. That's why it's important to monitor the response rate, and it's important to see the completion rate. Again, remember, we can improve the completion rate. We're not sure how we're going to improve the response rate. You could offer students an incentive like a bonus. You could pay people to complete the survey. You can appeal to their altruism. You can find other ways. You know, sometimes surveys will give a lottery for gift cards. There's all kinds of positive incentives that you have to be creative to think about. But incentives are important to understand. You know, who are the people that respond to incentives? Who are the people that do not? Okay. One of the questions that I've learned is going to be really important in terms of managing the survey is, where did you get the information about your survey? Was it posted at a university website? Was it announced at a university class? A professor recommended it? Was it friends? Was it Facebook? Was it Instagram? Ooh. And so now we ask that question and we find out how well our campaign is working in some formats and not others. All right, there we go. Okay. So if you were using WhatsApp, for example, you could be able to see, okay, well, who's using WhatsApp? Did WhatsApp lead to somebody posting it on Instagram, Facebook? Monitoring, okay, how different campaigns are working. Who are the people that are getting information from Twitter? I hate to say this. Not only is there an industry of people that just take surveys, and you have them too, but it really started in America. Everyone know who Kim Kardashian is? I'm still asking this question. What does she do? Why is her little sister a billionaire?
Makeup.
But, huh? She's an influencer. We've come up with a new occupational category that's very highly compensated called influencers. What does an influencer do? Any influencers here? Of course we're influencers. We reshape the worldview of our students and we equip them with skills that hopefully will give them an opportunity to get a job and have a family and be happy and successful. But what is the job of an influencer? Well, you have to people have to follow you to be influenced, right? I just read an article that the average influencer in America makes about $500,000 a year. Well, how do you become an influencer? You get a Twitter account and you have hundreds of thousands, millions of people follow you. And you take a picture of a new shopping bag and you say, hey, I love this bag. And next thing you know, Kim Kardashian, they say 400,000 new bags have been sold and she makes X millions of dollars. What does that mean to us? Well, there are influencers. There are people that you can go to with Twitter accounts of hundreds of thousands, millions of people, whether it's local, regional, national, whatever, and you could, if you had the resources, pay them to say, hey, great survey, I highly recommend that you take it. Really? That's what marketing now is all about. So you can do a laborious approach and try to post all your information with anybody who you know that would put it on an Instagram account and send it out on WhatsApp, or you could literally get in your budget to hire influencers. Influencers, obviously, that are connected to your target population. That's what the world is evolving to within the changing space of communications of social media. Notice here the boxes for an open-ended question. You will be able to simply ask a question and they'll type in their answer. You'll be able to link, if you wanted, to extract that open-ended question and pull out the responses to your structured questionnaire. So if you wanted to have a better understanding about who that person is that gave you that qualitative response, you can get that information about them. That's different from just simply downloading all of the responses. So for example, I'm really interested in what's the different types of businesses that women are starting versus men are starting. So I downloaded all of the qualitative descriptors about the businesses these entrepreneurs expected to establish and compared male versus female. So I wasn't as concerned about the depth of knowledge of each individual respondent in terms of how they decided on that particular business to start. Yeah.
About your project here, you mentioned before that you have to choose the main title for your project. And the title here is supposed to be very important for the population here to introduce this project to the people here. So do you think this title project, or this type of project, it's important here for the population here in Saudi Arabia? And you talked about accuracy. You mentioned here before that about approximately 800% responses to your survey. You think it's represents the population here in Saudi Arabia? So the accuracy here will be high or very low?
Which survey are you referring to?
You mentioned before it's 800 here, 800, approximately 850 maybe, or something like that. I don't remember the total number.
Yeah.
But 800 from approximately 20 million person here in Saudi Arabia. Do you think the accuracy here is here in this project? I don't understand. And the main title, why you select this just for me? I wonder. The main title here about love and marriage. Do you think it's very important here for the population here to introduce such a project? Thank you.
Well, number one, this is a project that I just started.
Yes.
So we're not talking about representative.
2020 will be finished.
Huh? Yeah.
2020, yes. But approximately you started, I don't know the real date that you began your project here. But you mentioned about maybe the spring of 2020, as I remember.
Basically, I'm going to do it for over a year.
For
about a year.
About a year. For 1 year, you just get 800 responses to your survey.
No, nobody said that.
You mentioned here on your slide, previous slide.
This is after 4 months.
No, before this one, I noticed here that.
This is the English version, not the Arabic version.
Yeah.
So when those two are combined, and by the end of the survey, we will have about 3,000.
3,000. Do you think it's enough number, even 3,000? Do you think it's enough number to represent and decide what's important or non-important for your project here to summarize the thinking of the people here? 3,000 from 20 million person here. It's enough number to.
Oh, absolutely. If you're doing a rigorous methodology.
You don't mention here it's male or not female, but I'm not the gender. I don't notice the gender here.
Well, I'm not using I'm not presenting the results on this survey because it's not completed yet. I'm giving you the results of a survey that is completed.
Actually, when you divided us for several groups here, our groups here decided there is a problem with the community here, so we decided the prices and so on. It's important for the population, but when you talk about love here, what's you? I just wonder.
Oh, this is.
Why just focusing on love and marriage here for this population? That's my question. Really.
Yeah, I think it'll be a profound understanding of the future development of the social change in the kingdom, that we'll see how the relations and tensions between tribal relationships and family relationships, with the rise of higher educational opportunities and the influx of more modern influences from external groups that are not Saudi-based, how the society is going to cope with that period of rapid and disruptive change. And if that changes occurs, because number one, is change occurring? That's a research hypothesis. Will there be cultural continuity given a rather homogeneous population that has not encountered significant change? That's the first research hypothesis to address. Based on the preliminary findings, there's dramatic change, and one way of comparing it is from one generation to another. That's one way of assessing change. The other part is to assess change cross-sectionally, and that is to see within this generation, is there significant change within the generation versus across the generation. And within that context, then you can begin to see the persistence, let's say, of marriage. So is there an increase in divorce rates, for example, of love marriages versus arranged marriages? What does that mean about household formation? What is that going to mean in terms of the ability to sustain a certain standard of living? It also tells us about mating and selection patterns. Are we talking about the rise of two-income households? Or are we talking about a more patriarchal single household? And then we start to look at how the delays in marriage. So if a generation that got married at 20 is now getting married at 30, what does that mean to the housing market if people aren't buying a house at 25 but they're delaying it to 30? Is that going to have stress on the housing market? What does that mean in terms of fertility levels, that there's a delay in marriage? So instead of the mother's generation getting married at 19 or 20, if the current generation is having children at 28 to 30, what impact does that have on fertility levels? So now we see already the demographic transition has occurred in Saudi Arabia from about 4.5 children 25 years ago to about 2.5 children. What are the implications to the demand for expatriate workers if the national population is contracting its household size in 2 generations from now? Could the effect of Saudization that integrates all Saudis into the labor market, but this number of children has been reduced by 60%, what does that mean in terms of satisfying the labor market 2 generations from now? So there's lots of, I think, implications of this disruption, that the question is, where is it coming from? Is it endogenous to the society, or is it a reflection now of, for example, Saudi Arabia has been the #1 consumer of YouTube videos in the world. Why? Has that had an effect on the society and the culture? These are the types of research questions, if you consider them important, can tell you more about the future a generation or 2 from now. I think what I want to do is I want to show you a completed survey. And I'll talk about the impact of my interest in terms of the relationship between the Saudi labor market and entrepreneurship. And based on my research findings, what I call this, the new rising Saudi entrepreneur generation, and particularly the issues of causality of the dramatic rise of female entrepreneurship, and especially the role of integrating women into the economy, given the dire demand to diversify the Saudi economy. What difference does it make in terms of integrating women as entrepreneurs versus integrating young men as entrepreneurs? And particularly given the fact that delay in marriage is a fundamental disruption of the traditional life course in Saudi Arabia, the question is, how are ladies addressing and adjusting to not getting married at 20, but the possibility of not getting married to 30? And so does that mean that we're going to see a much higher increase in capital formation, human capital formation, of ladies that traditionally would have been married but now are enrolling into master's programs, or ladies whose parents under guardianship restrictions won't allow them to work in mixed environments and instead are starting their own businesses? And see that space that's emerging for self-employment and personal empowerment, that space has been created because they're not getting married when their mother's generation got married. So I think there's a lot of implications to the economy and society, particularly given the current government's decision to release a lot of the restrictions on guardianship requirements. So I'm happy to debate that as we go over some of the other issues. I just want to show you that these questions now give us an opportunity to manage the survey. So if I've got too many women in my survey, can I have too many women in my survey? Yes and no. I never want to say don't take my survey if you are part of the targeted population. What I can do is reweight that population. So as I'll show you in the surveys, it seems like 65% of the survey tends to be female. Is that bad? I'm happy because there's not enough information about ladies. But when I come to put together a representative sample and interpret the results in terms of population proportions that reflect Saudi Arabia, I'm going to reweight it to the population. So I take that 65% and I reduce it in weight to 53%. So these become issues about how we're going to manage the survey before we do the analysis of the survey. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we're going to have to address these issues of collecting the data but then analyzing the data. So for example, if you wanted to set up, you're going to have 1,000 people in your survey, you're going to have a quota sample of 500 men, 500 women, you've got constrained resources, and suddenly now you hit 500 women. Now you can shut it off. Now you can focus your marketing campaign for your response rate to see how do we get more men to take the survey. As you look at, if it's a national survey, and I didn't say whether it was a national or a regional or a provincial survey, but let's suppose it was a national survey and we've got 1/3 of our population from the Eastern Province. Well, now I stop taking more surveys from the Eastern Province. Now I'm talking to other project managers in different provinces in the kingdom and say, hey, we're shutting down the Eastern Province, we hit our targets. Now you're underperforming in the central region. What's going on in Jeddah? We've got to figure out a way to improve our response rate, and then that's independent of our completion rate. So then we might look and see, well, where are we getting the most responses from? What's going on that people are monitoring their Instagram accounts, but they're not going to Facebook? And again, resources available. It sounds strange, but I've had students that come to me and say, you know, I've got 142,000 followers on Twitter. Do you want me to discuss your survey on my Twitter account? Never would have thought about it 5 years ago. Now that's an opportunity that could have a big effect on the success or failure of your marketing of your survey. Bias. Depends on the size of your sample, and it also depends on your understanding of the selection bias. You're going to have to interpret who these people are, because we're all going to have certain biases in terms of our geographic location, a snowball effect of the people that started the survey and recommended it to other people. That's all part of the process of what is your project about. Are you trying to get a representative data collection strategy for the Eastern Province? Are you looking at only doing a study on Al-Hassa? Are you only looking at doing a study of King Faisal University? All of these questions are going to depend on how you're going to market your survey and the selection biases that are there.
Would it not be ideal if you predetermine the sample size by conventional statistical methods, and that set the target as according to the you understand what I mean?
For those of you who have done more complex statistics, once you start reweighting your data, second generation, third generation of reweighting affects the standard errors of your measures. And the more you reweight, the more unreliable your standard errors that are going to be adjusted are going to become. So you don't want to do too much reweighting, because now you've created a monster that it just keeps going through your data and changing everything. So you want to be really careful, try to keep your weights basic. So you want to make sure you've adjusted male-female. You know, maybe you want to make an adjustment for education or for age. But as you start looking for conjoined relationships, it affects so many things that you just can't be sure about the impact of. So we can, this is show you here, looking at just this part of the survey, you could start monitoring where people were getting their information from. I'm concerned about gender, so what do we have in this particular English survey? We see 67% are female. Now, I'm not concerned that 67% are female. I'm concerned that I'm not getting enough males, because I can adjust that simply by that parameter of gender. So let's break into our group and finish the activity 2. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you, and actually report on a completed survey. And we'll look at the questions that I asked, the levels of measurement and data that it offered. Then we'll look rigorously in terms of how you can create a composite measure. So I'm going to show you how I took 2 separate variables and combined them into a new measure. Then we're going to look at gender differences, and we're going to look at the direct implications, and then we'll look at forecasting implications. So let's do activity 2 now, and then we'll come back to my study on entrepreneurship among young Saudis.
Can we transfer the data from SurveyMonkey to the SPSS or some stuff?
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. The download functionality is you can specify the software. So you could download it into Excel, for example. That's what I try to get the students to do that aren't familiar with other forms of software. So that's specified for what software you want. So first what you would do is you would download it and then combine, you would combine the separate files. So I have English and Arabic, combine those in the download. So then you have one file. Or you could, if you wanted to analyze them, you could download them separately and then do the merge file function. So let's get back to our groups. I'm sure you're tired of hearing from me for a little bit. Give you a break.